What's up, y'all? Meowth here. I've got a pretty special video for you guys today. It is something that you guys have been asking for a very long time. I finally had time this expansion, so I finally got around to doing it. I present to you guys today my deck dump for Alterac Valley. 58 decks for the WoW format. So these are all decks that I have built and playtested a little bit throughout this entire expansion. Something in every class, a little bit of something for everybody. Top tier decks, second tier, some fun off meta jank, a little bit of everything for everybody. I hope you guys enjoy this video. All the deck codes and everything can be found by clicking the Discord link in the description below. So what that'll do is that'll get you to join my Discord, and then you'll scroll down to those deck list sections and all the deck codes will be in there. The reason that I'm sending you guys towards the Discord and not somewhere else is because that's where I'm going to be updating everything when I eventually go through and make changes, because, you know, as metas change and everything like that, the decks themselves will change, and I'll be updating them in Discord as soon as I'm done playing them on stream and stuff like that. So make sure you guys check that out if you guys want updates on all of the decks. Of course, you can find highlights for a lot of these videos over here on YouTube as well. You might find them linked throughout the video for certain decks, but you can also find them in the future by just hitting that subscribe button. You'll get notifications when videos of these decks go live. And of course, I'm always messing with these decks live over on Twitch, twitch.tv/getmeowth, streaming 3 days a week, sometimes 4. But yeah, I really hope you guys enjoy this this deck dump video. I know this is a video that you guys have been asking for a while, so I hope you guys do enjoy this video. And I do want to say that part of the reason that I'm excited to make this is that if we do eventually get changes to these decks at the very top of the metagame, I think a lot of these decks that I talk about in that second tier and even in this third tier could be competitively viable and would probably be the first places that I look when I look at new decks. But yeah, so let's dive into the logistics of this video. I'm going to be talking about decks in 3 different distinctions. So the first one is going to be kind of your top tier meta decks. So these are the decks to play, the decks to master if you want to hit Legend, or even hit those like higher echelon ranks in Legend. Then I'm going to be talking about that competitive second tier. So these are decks that do still do well, right? If you play them really well and learn them in and out, you can definitely hit Legend and high Legend with them. But they do have some fatal flaws, which is why they're kind of in that second tier, and they're not that super well-rounded deck to find itself in that top tier. And then, of course, I have a whole bunch of off-meta jank / decks that aren't super competitive right now. And that'll be in that third tier in that third part of the video. These should be timestamps so you guys can hop around to which category you want to check out. And of course, like I mentioned, all of the deck codes for all of the decks that we're going to be talking about today will be in that Discord link down below. Enough of me talking. Let's hop into some of these decks. I hope you guys enjoy. All right, so let's start off with our top tier decks. Like I mentioned, these are the decks that are the best of the best. These decks should be able to get you to Legend very easily as long as you learn the ins and outs. So let's start with the 2 that everybody knows and loves, or probably hates. So let's first of all start with Pirate Warrior. Quest Pirate Warrior, very, very good deck. You know this deck by now if you've played any sort of Wild Ladder for the past, I don't know, 6 months since Stormwind came out. It has actually been 6 months, but it's felt like it. But yeah, this is the deck you know and love. I will say that the 28 out of the 30 cards in here are super solid, super solidified, I think. The only really flex cards right now, the only cards that you really should consider changing, are the Shiver the Timbers. These are potentially replaceable for Sky Barges or Stormwind Freebooters, whichever you like better out of those. Or if you're queuing into a lot of stuff like Ignite Mage or Druids and want to hedge your bets a little bit, you can also run Neophytes in place of these as well. I'm going to talk about this for a very short amount of time because this deck is very well established and you kind of know what it's doing and it's nothing new. Alright, the next deck to talk about is Odd Quest Hunter, another deck that you should be very familiar with if you've played Ladder in the past 5 or 6 months. Again, the core to this deck is pretty much solidified, this 25 out of the 30 cards. The list that I'm running is running that Beardo Shopkeep Double Viper package. Some decks are running stuff like Master's Call and Tarantula. I really do like this package. I think Beardo is extremely powerful, especially against aggressive decks. As well as just giving you a little bit of insurance against Dirty Rat if you do need to try to go for that turn 5 Tavish and do end up getting punished for that. So yeah, this is the package of cards that I like. This is the same cards that I've been running for the past 3 or 4 months. The deck's been very, very good for me. The deck is just very, very good in general. If you want to win, you should probably be playing a lot more of this. All right, so let's move into the next couple of decks here. The next one I need to talk about is Ignite Mage. So believe it or not, even if your opponent is not cheating, Ignite Mage is still a very, very good deck. The deck with the tradable minions and the fact that the correct number has been optimized as we have moved on has made this deck much more consistent at popping off. And it's actually really annoying. I've had multiple games where somebody just goes Ice Block on 3, Ice Block on 4, combo you on turn 5, and there's just really nothing you can do about it. It's a really dumb play pattern. It's really hard to disrupt because they run so many minions. Loatheb and Neophytes are your best friends, but you only have so many of those. And they still do have 2 Ice Blocks. The deck is very, very powerful. The 1 Molten Reflection, the 1 Sandbinder, the 1 Piper, the 1 Hut Streak. This is what I was talking about as being kind of optimized version of the deck. The Acolyte of Pains, I was a little bit suspicious on when they originally came out with this list, but I mean, the card's still really, really good. It has withstood the test of time. Ignite Mage, even when people are not cheating, is still a pretty damn good deck. Alright, the next top tier deck that I want to talk about is Evenlock. This deck has kind of come back into the meta now that Free Shaman has been nerfed. We'll talk about Free Shaman in a second here. So yeah, this is the version of Evenlock that I'm running. They are running a couple of new cards, right? We are getting Dreadlich Tamsin and Lochalar, the Ice Lord. Lochalar is just a very solid card. It's not the best card. It's not a very good card in this deck by any means, but it's still a very, very solid inclusion. And I really, really like Dreadlich Tamsin. So Dreadlich Tamsin kind of on her own beats Pirate Warriors, which is really, really nice given the fact that Pirate Warriors can actually just assemble a ton of value. The AoE, the card draw, the generation of 3/3s is a very, very powerful effect for this deck. I really like using Tamsin kind of like turn 7, turn 8 in a lot of matchups as well, because as you will notice, I'm not actually running Dark Alley packs. Dark Alley packs are a little bit slow in my opinion. It's 4 mana for just a pile of stats that are terrible off of Raised Dead. Stuff like Anetheron and Mountain Giants are still a pile of stats, but they're at least really, really good when you get them off of Raised Dead. The minions off of Dark Alley Pact, not so much. And so I find myself going Mountain Giants, Anetherons, and Gnolls on turns 3, 4, 5. Maybe Raise Dead on 5 and 6 for some more threats, and then I use Dreadlich Tamsin as that refill and just kind of final wave of pressure, and it served me really, really well. My early game is, and my kind of low end of the curve is filled with a bunch of tech cards, so I really, really like Soul Rends against Pirate Warriors instead of Galactic Crawlers. You don't really care about fatigue in that matchup anyway, so the Soul Rends are really, really nice. The Weblord, speaking of Pirate Warriors, Weblord's a much better tech card than Galactic Crawlers against Pirate Warrior because you don't have to worry about eating their minions if you just don't let them play their 1-drops and progress their quest. Coin Weblord against the deck, actually backbreaking. And then I like the Watch Post instead of the Neophytes against stuff like Ignite Mage, just the more constant pressure, and they're fine to Raise Dead as well. And then, of course, you've got the Dirty Rats, because Dirty Rats are kind of just a staple in our format right now. But yeah, this is the deck that I really, really like. I've actually had a decent amount of success against the 2 decks that we've mentioned previously in Odd Hunter and Pirate Warrior with this version of the deck. Ignite Mage is still a little bit of a struggle. Maybe I should be bringing in those Neophytes or maybe Nerubian Unravelers. But yeah, Evenlock, been really, really good for me the last couple of weeks. And more people probably should be playing it. It's still a very, very good deck. All right, and now let's talk about 2 of the newcomers to kind of that top tier of decks here from Alterac Valley. So we have to talk about Free Shaman. When the expansion dropped, Free Shaman was absolutely insane. The Snowfall Guardian did eventually get nerfed. I think the deck is still insane, but not as insane as it used to be. The deck that I've got on the screen for you guys today is kind of my anti-Pirate Warrior build of Free Shaman right now. Like you can see the double Galactic Crawlers. I like the Boom Pistol Bullies. They're really, really nice in the mirror if you are facing any of those, but they do also help stop. Just against Pirate Warrior kind of is a time warp. They don't really get to play any of their Battlecry minions on turn 5, including their quest reward. And then if you kind of mimic that, but I also really like the Dragon Breath against the Shaman Mirrors. That might be just specific for my local meta. So in this deck, stuff like the Galactic Crawlers, the Dirty Rats, the Boom Pistols, the Lurker Blower, your Flex slots, feel free to change them out for whatever you're playing against. For stuff like Serenites and Mutanus, if you want to tech yourself for the mirror. You can run Watch Post or Neophytes in these slots for Ignite Mages and the slower Druid builds. So feel free to mess with this deck to fit your local meta. But that core of that deck is still really, really powerful. And I would not be surprised if you saw people start rioting about Ice Fishing Clerical Talks as kind of the next broken degenerate thing, if and or eventually the Hunter and the Pirate quest ever get touched. So keep an eye out on this deck. I think it's really, really good. Just like that even lock, I think a lot more people should be playing it. And then the last deck that I have here in that top tier is Cthulhu Druid. So this is Cthulhu the Shattered, Combo Druid, Control Druid, whatever you want to call it. This deck was originally popularized by Martian Boo, a wild streamer. And he has taken this deck. A lot of people have taken this deck and had a lot of success with it. The main reason to play this deck is that it's very, very good against Odd Hunter and has a pretty decent success rate against stuff like Pirate Warrior. You do have some auto loss matchups and stuff like Ignite Mage, maybe stuff like Linecracker Druid as well. So you do have a couple of just auto loss matchups, but it's still just a very, very solid deck against a lot of the top tier meta stuff that it's probably worth playing. This deck, I think you really just need to think about it as just Control Druid, because that's exactly what it is, right? You have double Plague, double Seeds, all the removal in the world that you can potentially double up on with Moonlight Guidance if you need to. I think the deck is just really, really solid. Control Druid with Wildheart Guff has made a very significant comeback, as we'll talk about in the next tier of decks. A very, very solid deck, very, very solid core. And you know these Druid decks are all running Howl and Paths and Seeds and Plague. That just really, really solid inclusion of cards that have always been good for a very long time. And Guff is just kind of the latest inclusion to that, especially after we have had Celestial Alignment nerfed. All right, so let's move into the second tier of decks here. So these decks, like I mentioned, do kind of have some fatal flaws, but they are still very, very good decks that you can hit Legend with, that if you're piloting it well in the right meta, can definitely still hit High Legend as well. So for me, I'm going to start in Druid. I'm going to talk about these three kind of together at the same time because they are basically the same deck, because they share 28 out of the same cards or something like that. So first of all, we've got Malygos Druid. So I should preface this by saying once alignment got nerfed, we have kind of completely shifted over to the Guff builds of a lot of these decks. I don't know if alignment maybe should still be seeing play. Nobody's really tested it, myself included, just because the Guff builds have been good anyways. So the first one I've got for you guys is Mali Druid. I mean, you just make 1,000,000 mana, you have Aviana Kun, you have all these UIs, you can do 1,000,000 things in one turn with this deck, because why not? Super flexible combo deck. Is a little bit more resilient to Rat than the next that I'm going to talk about, which is Togwaggle Druid. Togwaggle Druid, if you get your Azlina or Tog ratted, you're kind of out of luck, but very similar to the Cthulhu Druids. This is just a Control Druid, but instead of playing Cthulhu the Shattered as your win con, you're playing Tog Azlina, and you'd run a lot more draw. And then the Linecracker Mecha'thun, so this one's coming from Burnt. Net decked him a little bit here. This is your Linecracker Druid build. You don't have to solely rely on Gloop anymore now that you have 1,000,000 mana with Guff. But the idea is you play Gloop and Linecracker, or maybe if you have enough mana you don't need to. You play Linecracker, you play 2 copies of Bees to make your Linecracker have 1,200 something attack. You play Doubler than Scales, you gain 2,500 armor, and your opponents can't do anything about it, and you eventually win the game. If you're playing in a mirror, or if you don't want to sit there because your opponent starts ripping you out because they're a little bit toxic, then you can just play Mecha'thun and win the game that way with a combo with Seeds and or Naturalize once you've dumped your hand. Specifically, I think the Mecha'thuns are in here because of Ignite Mage, because Ignite Mage will take you to the rope because they technically don't fatigue either, and Mecha'thun is the way to actually win the game there. But yeah, these are all 3 decks that play very, very similarly to each other. The reason that they're in the second tier and not that top tier is that they are actually susceptible to disruption from Dirty Rats, which the Cthulhu the Shattered Druid isn't. So I do think that they are actually still pretty good decks that can definitely get you to Legend. Yeah, so let's move on to our next deck here. We've got Even Hunter. I actually think Even Hunter is a very, very strong anti-combo and anti-control deck once it got the inclusion of Ice Traps. So that Secret Passage of 2 Cat Tricks, 2 Ice Traps, 2 Pressure Plates just make you a very, very good deck against all the Ignite Mages and stuff like that. The issue with this deck is you get absolutely bodied by Pirate Warrior. Like, absolutely freaking obliterated. You have like a 10% win rate. It's miserable. Yeah, and so if you're queuing to a lot of Pirate Warriors, I do not recommend playing this deck. This is the version that I last played. I do think that you can cut the Rat Traps and Snipes, and you can run double Cult Neophyte if you would like. You can also cut Steam Weedle Snipers if you're not going to even try to beat Pirate Warriors. So yeah, those are your 2 flex slots. You got those 2 secrets that I just mentioned in Steam Whittle Snipers. You can run stuff like Cult Neophytes. You can run stuff like Knife Vendors. You have a couple of options there. Moving into Mage, in the second tier here, we've got APM Mage. This is very similar to Ignite Mage. This is a very annoying Mage deck to play against. Unlike Ignite Mage, though, it is a lot more fun to play. This is kind of similar to Mizaki Mage in Standard, but it's a little bit more flexible, where you have the Flame Wakers and the Sorks and the Evocations, and you do a little bit of scamming and a lot of damage with Flame Wakers. I highly recommend checking out some of Corbet's gameplay if you want to check out some some APM Mage gameplay and guides. I'm a boomer. I don't play this deck very much because I do not have the APM for it. So good luck to you, and play this before Sork gets nerfed, because it's totally going to happen. I promise. Copium. Let's move into Paladin here. The first deck I want to talk about is Hand Buff Paladin. So I think this deck is just very, very strong, even after the Trog nerfs. This is the build that I'm running. The 30th card here is the Sidon, not the Scarlet, but I've actually really, really liked Sidon. It's just most of the time it's a 3-mana 6/6 with Rush, 3-mana 8/8 with Rush. That is just really, really powerful, and they do have to deal with it. Yeah, I mean, I don't really need to talk too much about this. The deck is super solid. It does struggle a little bit into Odd Hunter is the main reason that it finds itself here, Odd Hunter and Ignite. Unless you find that early Cariel and they haven't killed you beforehand. Cariel is your best friend, and you just hope the Odd Hunters don't find their Vipers before you can kill them. I do like the Stone Tusk Boars as just faster burst, right? So you can combine it with stuff like your Glowstone Technicians with Cariel in the later game. You could squeeze it in with a Hero Power and a couple of Chargers. I will say, feel free to run Righteous Defenses over the Trogs if you're queuing into a lot of Even Locks and decks like that. Feel free to shift in the Chargers and the spell package for the Vindicator depending on what you're playing against, but I think Hand Buff Paladin itself is a pretty strong deck that should not be slept on. And the other Paladin deck that I want to talk about is Tax Paladin. So Tax Paladin, this is the deck that probably hates the Trog nerf the most, but the deck is still really, really solid. I know a couple of other people outside of me have had a lot of success with this deck at High Legend on NA. The Bridge is the card that I want to talk about here. I thought this card was a complete and total meme, but going like Coin Bridge into Call to Arms is absolutely gross. And doing stuff like Bridge with a Trog on the board, and then copying the Trog, even though you don't get the buffed original version of the Trog, that Trog summons with a 3/4 from the Bridge, which is nothing to scoff at. I think this deck is pretty damn good at bullying stuff like Ignite Mages and those slower Druid decks. The Web Lords are really, really strong against the Shaman decks. The issue with Tax Paladin right now is that it, like most board-based decks, gets completely obliterated by Pirate Warrior, and it does still struggle a lot against Odd Hunter because you don't have a ton of healing if you can't get that Cariel out early. But yeah, Tax Paladin, I mean, this is always going to be one of my favorite archetypes. If you watched a lot of the YouTube videos here on this channel, you know that I do like making people play fair. One of my favorite archetypes. I do want to touch on one last thing here. That Living Dragon Breath you see, again, it's a tech right now for Shaman. Feel free to try out a whole bunch of cards for that 30th slot. It is your flex spot. I would also just recommend maybe trying out a second Bridge in place of that Living Dragon Breath. I've been really impressed with the Bridge, so I would be curious to see if double Bridges work out well as well. All right, moving into the second tier of Priest decks. The first one I want to talk about is that aggro Shadow Priest. The deck's good. The deck hits face. The deck sucks against stuff like Pirate Warrior. But against decks that don't have that early interaction, and you get to snowball boards with Void Touch Attendants, this deck is very hit or miss. It is like a turn 3, turn 4 lethal deck, or it's a turn 3, turn 4 lose the game sort of deck because you have no gas. The deck will make for quick games, and it has its advantages, right? If those Warlock decks come back, like Evenlock and Reno Evenlock and stuff like that, Aggro Priest is a very, very good choice into that local meta. The other Priest deck I want to talk about is a deck that's really recently popped up. I actually just played this the other day, and it's actually very surprisingly good. I'm talking about Drekthar Inner Fire Priest. So I don't know where exactly this build came from. I've been told a lot of different sources, but basically the idea behind this deck is it completely obliterates Pirate Warrior. And against Odd Hunter, if they don't have the Hunter's Mark, you kind of have that Evenlock strategy of make a big boy early, smack him in the face, and hope they can't remove it, and you end the game before it really matters. But yeah, the big inclusion here obviously is Drekthar, but Shadow or Devour against those wide boards of pirates are actually really, really gross. And the Gift of the Naru, I mean, as we predicted, very, very solid cantrip style card that combos really, really nicely with Northshire Cleric. But yeah, this is a deck that I'm actually really excited to play around with some more. I know some people don't necessarily like Inner Fire. It's an archetype that I've always just found super intriguing because it's super unique, and so I really, really liked it. But yeah, this is the build that I'm running right now. I highly recommend checking it out if you haven't already. All right, moving into the rogue decks, the first one I want to talk about is Kingsbane Rogue. This is the version that I'm running right now. I've been testing out Scabs as just kind of a pseudo ice block style effect against Pirate Warrior. And it's been really good at that specific thing. It's not super hot against a lot of the other decks in the meta. It maybe buys you a turn against, say, Free Shaman. But basically, it's very similar to the Poison Rogue archetypes, is kind of what Kingsbane Rogue has evolved into, the Poison Rogues of Standard, rather, where you, in the early games, right, on turn 3 and 4, you were trying to make as big of a Kingsbane as possible, right? And then you were smacking him in the face, and then you are hiding behind a Cloak of Shadows, and you're hoping that buys you enough time so that you can hit them in the face again. Because not a lot of decks right now in the meta are running a ton of taunts, and so you don't need stuff like Blade Flurries or Doomerangs. This is very similar to the Poison Rogue strategy, like it or not. The other rogue deck that I do want to talk about is Pillager Rogue, Combo Pillager Rogue. Very similar to Ignite Mage, where this deck can kill you out of nowhere on turns 4, 5, or 6. Yeah, so Pillager getting that nice little buff from, I believe, the mini set, right, with that Cutlass. So yeah, I believe that this is kind of the optimized 30 now for Pillager Rogue. It's been around for a little bit, so there's not much flexibility here. I don't think Scabs is necessary because you're trying to kill them before turn 7. All right, as we move into the Shaman decks here in that second tier, I want to start with Galakron Shaman. So this is a deck that I think maybe got written off a little bit too early when the expansion released. People quickly gravitated to the pure Shudderwalk control style of free Shamans. And I do want to just bring up Galakron Shaman. This is not a deck that I have played very much, so I do want to give a little bit of notice for this deck specifically. This is not one that I have played super recently, but when I was making this video, I revisited this deck. And the more that I look at it, the more I think that we might have moved on too quickly from this archetype. I think that this deck is still extremely strong, right? It still has that extremely powerful core from those freeze Galakron Shamans. That is kind of what makes that deck so powerful. But with that Galakron package and the inclusion of stuff like the Caverns, you should have a much stronger matchup into specifically Pirate Warriors. So if you're in that diamond bracket and you're queuing into a ton of Pirate Warriors, I think this deck is super, super worth looking at. So the reason that it's worth looking at is that you give up some of that late game value that freeze Galakron Shaman has with stuff like Grumble and those Serenites and stuff like that, which you might not necessarily need if you're queuing into a ton of Odd Hunters and Pirate Warriors, and you give that up for that extremely powerful interaction with those Galakron cards. So I think I do want to give a little bit of a warning. This is not something that I personally have played super recently, so I am sorry if I dustbait any of you guys, but I do think that this deck does have a ton of potential. So try it out and let me know down in the comments if you guys have success with this deck. The other Shaman deck that I do want to talk about here is Frog Shaman. So shoutouts to Tulia, who hit rank 1 Legend 9A with this deck. So this deck is a full mulligan for Drekthar and Spirit of the Frog, because once you find those, then you draw a million cards and you burn out your opponent in combination with a bunch of these burn spells plus Overdraft, so that you get to go again the next turn. But yeah, I think this deck is super fun. It is a little bit boom or bust with Spirit of the Frog and Drekthar, but if somebody hit rank 1 Legend with it, it is consistent enough, right? It was consistent enough over a long period of time, and it's good. When this deck pops off, it does extremely broken, powerful things. It does what a wild deck needs to do. So yeah, check out this Frog Shaman. Just avoid Odd Hunter, avoid Ignite Mages, and please avoid Lothebs at all costs. As we move into the Warlock section of these Tier 2 decks, there are a bunch of Warlock decks to talk about. The main issue with a lot of these Warlock decks is that they just struggle against the top tier, right? They either have some glaring weakness into Free Shaman or Odd Hunter or Pirate Warrior or Ignite Mage, or a combination of those 4 decks that are just some glaring weakness for that deck. So let's start with Reno Evenlock. I think the reason that this deck has fallen off is primarily because of the rise in stuff like Free Shaman that can kind of just, like, their late game just kind of trumps your late game with the specific strategy that you go with in Reno Evenlock. But that being said, I think even Arena Lock is still a very, very powerful deck against Pirate Warrior. I think it still does have the potential, if you build it correctly, to still be a solid choice into Odd Hunter. Ignite Mage is going to be something of a struggle, but if you include stuff like Watchpost or Darkness or Unraveler or Cult Neophytes over stuff like the Demonic Assault or Galactic Crawler or Soul Rend that I'm running in this list, then your chances in that matchup do go up. You can also run stuff like Demonic Projects if you want as well. But yeah, Reno Evenlock, this was my baby. This is what I played all at the end of United in Stormwind because it was the only deck that I enjoyed. Still enjoy playing it. Its power level has dropped off a little bit here, though, in Alterac Valley. The next deck that I want to talk about is Cute Lock. This is Hopper's Cute Lock, who has also hit rank 1 on NA with this deck. Man, this deck is freaking broken. No, I'm just kidding. It does do some pretty disgusting high roll stuff, though, and when it does do that disgusting high roll stuff, you might be thinking to yourself that it is freaking broken. This deck aims to make a huge-ass board on turn 1 and 2, and then buff them up on turn 3 and turn 4, and then kill your opponent with that. Man, that Expired Merchant Hand to Gul'dan combo is something. The main reason to play this deck is it farms out hunters, right? They can't really deal with how wide you go as fast as you go. And then you buff it up, put it out of range of the removal, and you just kill them. Does a lot of stuff. Deck's super fun to play. Make sure you guys check it out. The next deck that I do want to talk about is Mechathune Warlock. It has survived yet another nerf. This deck will just not go away. Turns out cards that just say win the game on them turn out to be pretty powerful in Eternal formats. And that's where we're at with Mechathune Warlock. Dreadlich Tamsin, very, very powerful card in this deck. Phylactery, this is the legendary spell from the new set, is actually super crucial to this deck. Shoutouts to Swag and Rotted Zombie, I think, who were the first people that I remember talking about this on Twitter. And the reason that Phylactery is so powerful in this deck is that it does one of 3 things. It serves as Dirty Rat protection for your Mechathune. So one of the big, weaknesses of the deck in the past is like, oh, they can rat your Mechathune and they just lose, right? If they rat your Vol'jin or they rat your Mechathune, then you have the opportunity to use the Phylactery to combo that Mechathune Death Rattle on any of your 1-drops or Wicked Shipment to still get that Mechathune effect and still win the game. You can use it on stuff like Mistress of Mixtures, against stuff like Pirate Warrior, Odd Hunter for huge burst of healing, right? I've had people literally go from 4 health to 30 against me using Phylactery and Mistress of Mixtures. And then in certain matchups, you can also use it on Blood Mage Thalnos as a way to kind of just draw 4 or 5 cards if you're not worried about Dirty Rats. So stuff like Cthulhu Druid or Togwaggle Druids, you can run out of Thalnos and then copy that Death Rattle with a Phylactery and draw a bunch of cards. And Rune Mithril Rod, I think, is the last thing I want to talk about in this deck. At 5 mana, it's still good enough, which is crazy. It blows my mind that this card's still good enough at 5 mana. It is a little bit slow, but it does so much, which is gross. Yeah, Mechathune Warlock, as boring as it may seem to some people, is still a very, very good deck. And the reason that I think this deck is super powerful, it beats up on Shamans who don't know what you're doing, beats up on all the combo Druid decks that are out there, and it beats up on Pirate Warrior. This deck actually does so well against Pirate Warrior. Odd Hunter and Ignite Mage are a little bit of an issue, but if you can dodge those matchups, Mechathune Warlock is a very, very good deck. And last but not least, the last Warlock deck that I do want to talk about here is Darkglare Warlock or Pain Warlock or Broomstick Warlock or whatever the hell you want to call it. The latest iterations of Painlock. I think this deck is still really, really powerful post all of the nerfs. I've really, really been liking Dreadlich Tamsin for the same reasons that I was talking about earlier in Evenlock. I think the deck is super sweet. Now that the deck has actually been nerfed and is not the most oppressive tier 1 deck that we had for like the better part of a year and a half, I think I'm going to admit it that I actually kind of like the Darkglare archetypes. Like, they're super sweet, they're super skill intensive. I'm okay with them being this, tier 2 power level deck that's just super sweet for it to be in the format, but I am also super glad that it is nowhere near the top tier that it used to be. But yeah, matchup wise, the main reason to play this deck is specifically its matchup into Pirate Warrior. The deck's really, really good. And it had passable matchups, I think, into Ignite Mage and Odd Hunter. Again, it's been a little bit since I've played this deck a lot myself. The main reason that this deck did fall off, though, was because of the prevalence of free shamans, but it does seem like free shamans have drastically dropped off in popularity, specifically at lower ranks. So yeah, if you do want to farm all of those pirate warriors and odd hunters, Darkly Warlock might be a deck taking a look at if you can take the time and learn the ins and outs. All right, as we move into our third section of decks here, I'm going to be talking about 30 plus decks here that are off meta and jank, or meta decks that are not super powerful. I'm not going to talk about all these as in depth as I have the previous 20-something decks, and I say that because there's a reason they're here in the bottom tier. They have very significant weaknesses. They are just not as powerful as all the others. So I'm not going to talk about their matchup spreads. I'm not really going to talk too much about substitutions that you're going to make. I'm just going to share some pretty sweet lists if you guys want to check them out. If you guys have specific questions about any of these lists, make sure you guys join the Discord and ask in that Hearthstone channel. Just ping me, feel free, and I'll answer it to the best of my ability. All right, so let's start off. We've got Odd Demon Hunter. Odd Demon Hunter getting actually some pretty powerful tools here. We got Need from Greed from the previous mini set that I think is actually just better than Acrobatics. And then we got the Iron Deep Trog and the Glaive from the most recent set. With the Trogs, we get to just combo them with cards that we were already running, with stuff like Og Merchants and Sidekicks, make them really, really hard to kill, make it super likely that you duplicate the Trog and get more damage in. I think the Glaive itself is super sweet. Be able to clear up board while still going face is a very, very powerful effect. And yeah, super excited for Odd Demon Hunter. I'm waiting for those unnerves, man. I'm waiting for Odd Demon Hunter to get all of those toys back and actually be a super legit force in the meta. The other Demon Hunter deck that I do want to talk about is Aggro Tax Demon Hunter. So this deck was heavily influenced and inspired by White Delight, who climbed to legend with this deck a couple of months ago. My memory's a little bit foggy here, but the idea is to use Drekthar because Drekthar is busted, and then you are pulling out stuff like Robes of Protections, Web Lords, you got Cult Neophytes, we got the Trogs obviously as well, and then we're using that new Demon Hunter Kurtrus, who is a very, very powerful effect, and then you can combo it with Fellfire Deadeye as well as all of these other just solid taxi minions. The deck doesn't look like it's supposed to function, but it does, because it turns out when you lock your opponent out of doing things on curve and you get in a bunch of chip damage, eventually that chip damage adds up and you just get to kill them. But yeah, these are the Demon Hunter decks. Let's move into Druid. So keeping in with that aggro theme, I've got a couple of aggro Druid decks to share with you. We've got aggro Taunt Druid and aggro Beast Druid. These all are very similar decks. One of them is a Drekthar build, very similar to what you saw in Standard for a little bit there, combining it with the Razormane Battle Guard and composting of Pack Mules and stuff like that. We get that Pirate package with Embiggen and Wild alongside Mark of the Lotus. And then we got the aggro Beast Druid, trying to take advantage of specifically that Frostsaber Matriarch. Both of these decks have really clear weaknesses into Odd Hunter and Pirate Warrior, which is why you don't see them on ladder a ton. But if those two decks do ever get addressed, I think these are two decks that you definitely keep an eye on. I think these decks actually have a ton of potential if Pirate Warrior and Odd Quest Hunter just didn't exist. Some other Druid decks that I want to talk about are Quest Druids, both regular Quest Druid and Odd Quest Druid. One of the main reasons to play this deck is if you just want to bully the hell out of Odd Hunters. If you are absolutely sick and tired of playing against Odd Hunter, Quest Druids are definitely kind of one of the decks that you want to gravitate towards, because that was one of the reasons that they were really good back in Stormwind. Not a ton of tools here that are new. You can talk about Guff in the regular Quest Druid. It's not something that I've played a ton of. These were just basically copy and paste from those Stormwind decks without much upgrades. Let's talk about Token Druid itself. So this is the Spell Token Druid list. I'm running a version here trying to utilize Capture Coldtooth Mine as a way to pull Spreading Plagues, pull Glowfly Swarms, pull Arbor Ups out of your deck, trying to take advantage of that. I do think that this deck misses Gibberling. As degenerate as Gibberling was, the issue with Token Druid right now is that it takes just a little too long to get onto the board. And so we're heavily relying on stuff like Plague as kind of the way that we win games against aggro decks, because we're too slow to get on the board. We rely on Plague, rely on the fact that they can't get through the Plague, and then you buff up from there. So yeah, that's Token Druid, favorite of mine. Not the greatest in the meta. Ship's Cannon is a card that makes you cry. And then a couple of decks that I do want to share here. So the first one is a Arena Druid, heavily inspired by Killer Raccoon, who I believe hit top 100 legend on EU with this deck. This is just good cards Druid deck. just like most druid decks that I've talked about today, find that guff, make a bunch of mana so that you can do multiple turns or multiple plays within one turn, rather. And then we do have that Get You in the Shattered package with Moonlight Guidance that we were talking about up at the top. We just get to add yellow cards to our deck. Yellow cards always make things better, or worse, depending on your opinion. And the last druid deck is a Jade Fatigue Druid. This list was stolen from Corbett. The idea behind this deck, use Capture Coldtooth Mine, find the Guff, because it's the only 5-cost card in your deck, so that you consistently hit Guff on 5. Then you just do Control Druid things, right? Remove all the stuff, ramp all the mana, draw all the cards, make all the big green men, and eventually win the game. As we move into Hunter here, I do want to talk a little bit about Drekthar Secret Hunter, because I think it's a little bit closer to being in that top two tiers than a lot of the other decks that I'm going to talk about in this this tier 3 of off-meta jank. Drekthar in combination with Beastalker Tavish. When you do Drekthar into Gosper, Cloaked Huntress, this deck does have some pretty gross, disgusting high rolls. I do think that it's just missing a little bit to get it over the line. But I do think that this deck actually has a lot of potential. I've had about a 60% win rate with this deck over about 40 games in High Legend. And so I do think that this deck actually has a ton of potential. Again, this is just one of those decks that I need Flare and Odd Hunter to not exist. I need Ship's Cannon and Pirate Warrior to not exist. And if those two things disappear, this deck rockets up the power rankings. And I think it would be a very, very good deck. The other Hunter deck here in this tier is Reno Big Beast Hunter, a Reno deck without Zephyrus. There's a YouTube video about this deck, so I'm not going to talk too much about this, but this deck relies on Vandar. I think this is the first deck that we've talked about today, utilizing Vandar. So you use Vandar, you make all these big beasts that Hunter has gotten over the years. You make them really freaking cheap, which makes them actually playable in Wild. So you get to do some dumb broken things. The deck is a ton of fun to play. If this is not going to cost you 7,200 dust to play, I highly recommend checking it out, because it's definitely fun as a little bit of a break here when it comes to off-meta stuff. As we move into Mage, I want to start with Parrot Mage. So very similar to that Drekthar Secret Hunter, Parrot Mage is the deck that I think is actually a lot closer to that top 2 tiers than it is to all the other decks in this tier, where it actually has some pretty insane potential, which is kind of gross given the fact that you take infinite turns. Like this deck, makes them for some sweet quality highlights, but it's a deck that I really hope and pray does not actually become top tier, because God, that would be so obnoxious, huh? Then I've got Reno Hero Power Mage. The reason that we are a Reno Hero Power Mage was because it was like the best shell that I could find for Hero Power Mage, and trust me, I played a lot of Hero Power Mage, and a lot of them really freaking sucked. I say it's Reno, but we're running 2 Wildfires because Wildfire is the best card in our deck, but we have a lot of ways to fetch spells. Again, another video about this deck up here on the YouTube channel, so I'm not going to talk too much more about it. Let's talk about Handmage itself. So Handmage is a deck that had a little bit of a coming out party in United in Stormwind. Alterac Valley giving it a couple of more tools. I am running that Shivering Sork as a way to discount your Conjurer's Calling, so you can pop off just a little bit earlier. And then I'm also running Ram Commanders as just a way, either control the board or also just do stuff like add to your hand size, which is really, really important in this deck. Super cool, unique archetype, actually, and check this out if you haven't already. And then while we're here, we have to talk a little bit about kind of 2 stalwarts of old. Start with Reno Pocket Galaxy Mage. I mean, if you want to be a masochist and you want to try this and lose a lot of games, feel free. But this would probably be how I would build Pocket Galaxy Mage. The issue with this is that it just can't keep up, man. It just cannot keep up with the Odd Hunters and the Pirate Warriors of the world. Can't keep up in tempo, can't keep up in value, just doesn't really have a home right now in the meta, which kind of sucks because it's always been one of my favorite decks. And then Secret Mage, I still remember like a year ago when you guys were all complaining and whining for Secret Mage nerfs, and all you had to do was get freaking Quest Hunter and Pirate Warrior. I mean, this is Secret Hunter syndrome, right? Where if you delete Odd Quest Hunter and you delete Pirate Warrior, then this deck actually becomes top tier again. Like, it comes out of wherever it's been slumbering, the cave that it's been hibernating in, and it'll be a force to be reckoned with again. I will say, I do not like, I've seen a couple of people talking about multicasters in Secret Mage. a 4-mana 3/4 that if you play it on curve is drawing you like 1 card, and then you have to play it on like turn 6 or 7 to draw you like 2 or 3. I really don't like it. I don't think it's worth it. It's just not. I don't think it's worth the slot in Secret Mage. So this would be the 30 that I'd run. We are running new cards in Shivering Stork. It's a very good card in that slot. But yeah, Secret Mage, man. If they do ever nerf those top two decks, keep an eye out for Secret Mage. So yeah, so Libram Paladin benefiting from Stonehearth Vindicator as a way to tutor out those Libram of Wisdoms, and then obviously Lightforged Cariel, just super solid inclusion in this deck. I think this deck, like many, get better if you remove Odd Hunter and Ignite Mage. Let's talk about Otter's Reno Handbuff Paladin. This is a deck that I have very recently got invaded by. This deck utilizes all of the best cards in Handbuff Paladin, and then you use his Polkelt to help you find the best card in your deck, maybe in all of Paladin, in Lightforged Cariel. Yeah, the game plan is very similar to Handbuff Paladin, except you get to run yellow cards. Yeah, make some big buff chargers. Use Cariel to block damage and stay alive, to buff your big chargers, and then just kill them. Yeah. So yeah, 2 more Paladin decks. First one, Big Paladin. This is maybe the memeiest of the decks that I've got for you guys. I was so hopeful that this would be a real archetype, and I really just could not find a build of this deck that had any success. This is the deck that felt the best for me. Like, it felt the smoothest to pilot. I still don't know whether it should be a Prismatic Lens deck or not, but I mean, you have the Vandar Hyrule, right? That's like your Barnes of Big Priest with this deck. This deck is just the cheating out of the cards just come out too slow, and then there's no recursion, so it's just too fair of a big minion deck. Which, don't get me wrong, is probably good, right? I don't want more big decks in the wild metagame. This deck just it's way too fair compared to all the other big decks out there in wild. And then the last deck, good old Odd Paladin. It hasn't gone anywhere. It also just hasn't gotten any new tools. And still sucks against Pirate Warrior. Just not fast enough against Ignite Mage. That being said, Odd Paladin does have one thing going for it, which is it does beat up on Odd Paladin. You should be able to go wide enough, fast enough to be favored in that matchup. As we move into Priest here, let's talk about Reno Priest. Let's start with Combo Reno Priest, a deck that's just kind of fallen out of the meta. So I'm pretty happy with 29 out of the 30 cards in this deck. The one card that I'm testing out a little bit is that new 5-mana Taunt that draws you a Shadow Spell and Holy Spell when it dies. If you try out this deck and you feel like it's too slow or not worth it, feel free to cut it for some more early game removal for Pirate Warriors. You can even run the Lotheb to help you against Ignite Mages and Odd Hunters. And then we have Engine's Quest Reno Priest. I have played this. It does, it's a viable archetype. Don't get me wrong. It is something that will get a lot better if they nerf the top tier decks of Odd Hunter and Pirate Warrior. It just doesn't do the unfair thing enough. It is Control Priest. It is a slow win con. It runs a bunch of AoE removal. It is out there if you insist on playing a slow Priest deck. And last but not least, gotta talk about Big Priest. I know you guys are gonna hate me for it, but nothing's really changed. So I'm not gonna spend too much time on it. It's basically the same 30 as United in Stormwind. All right, I've got a bunch of rogue decks to talk to you guys about, though. Let's start off with Tax's Rogue. So basically, this is Burn Rogue. This is running Scimitar instead of Kingsbane, so you don't have to commit a lot to that Kingsbane package. Basically, you're running the early Pirates. You're running a bunch of Burn. You're trying to end the game on turn 5, turn 6. Then you've got Cute Rogue. So this is using that Edwin Defias Kingpin and a bunch of 0-drops and 0-cost spells to make a big boy Edwin. And then you hope that they can't kill your big boy Edwin, and then you kill them with your big boy Edwin. Then we have Quest Rogue. So Quest Rogue has actually made a little bit of a comeback in Alterac Valley, just because it, can't really be interacted with by Quest Hunter, and so you get to kind of make a bunch of 5/5s as early as like turn 4, turn 5, and you kind of just race them. It's a pretty uninteractive deck. It is a little bit susceptible to like Dirty Rat, where like if they rat one of your 1/1s from the Bloodsail Flybooter, or they rat your Flybooter itself without a way for you to bounce it, it can get a little bit awkward to complete the quest. But yeah, I mean, the deck is legit. Like it's as good as it's been in a very, very long time. That being said, don't freak out. It's nowhere close to being top tier and requires a very, very specific meta. A deck that I am really excited about, it's a very, very fun meme deck. We've got Alterac Rogue. So we're utilizing the spell here, the sketchy information. So you try to prep it out, you try to coin it out with counterfeit coins or your real coin, and you try to get that out ASAP because that'll pull a Alterac, it'll trigger the Alterac, and you will summon a 3/5. And then if they can't honorably kill it, then you find something like Umbra, or you can use the counterfeit blade, and then you will pop your Alterac. And if you have an Umbra on the board, it's going to make an entire board full of Alteracs as early as like turn 3, turn 4, very similar to Dinomancer Warlock vibes. And then you use that full board of Alteracs that it's really hard for your opponent to kill to do some dumb things, include hit your opponent in the face really, really fast, really, really quickly. Super sweet deck. I actually think it has a ton of potential. Not gonna lie, it's kind of a deck to keep an eye on because I think it's only gonna get better as we move on, and could potentially be a super degenerate deck sometime in the future. Odd Rogue. Odd Rogue is a deck that hasn't gone anywhere. It also just hasn't gotten any new tools outside of Iron Deep Trog. The deck's still solid though. Like, the deck still wins games. The deck is just probably too boring for a lot of people to play. But if you guys haven't checked out Odd Rogue, super solid, super consistent deck that you probably should try out at least once. And as much as I hate this deck, I know a lot of you out there do love it. Let's talk about Mill Rogue. So this is updated Mill Rogue from the new set, between 2 vanishes, 2 cloaks, 2 evasions, Valera, scabs. God, you can actually just like not get hit for like 5 straight, 6 straight turns, and that's really freaking gross. All while you're setting up your Cold Light kind of mill package. The deck is still bad, don't get me wrong. You still struggle against a lot of the top tier decks with Ignite Mage and Odd Hunter and Pirate Warrior and stuff like that. But if you're willing to accept that, you can punish a lot of the slower decks in the format, like Free Shaman and stuff like that. And I know I'm saying all these words. The people out there that enjoy Mill Rogue are going to play Mill Rogue and enjoy playing Mill Rogue regardless of how it is in the meta. So let's move on to Big Rogue. So this is a deck that I was playing and winning a lot with in High Legend. And it actually was kind of gross, some of the high rolls. We're getting out all of these big minions as early as like turn 2, turn 3. The big minion package can vary, obviously, depending on what you're playing against. I was running 1 rag as a way to beat shamans the last time I played this, but feel free to cut the rag for like a second Abominable Lieutenant if you're not facing a ton of shamans. This is another deck that I think actually has a lot of potential because those high rolls start coming out on turn 3. And when that happens, people are going to start complaining because big minions as early as turn 3 was Barnes and Big Priest days that everybody absolutely complained about. And I do want to end one last thing here in Rogue with Burgle Rogue. So this is a deck that I know is about to get nerfed. Play it while you can. Maybe we'll get Null back in a year and a half, and Burgle Rogue can be a thing again. All right, moving to Shaman. So Drekthar, Murloc Shaman. Regular Murloc Shaman has sucked for a very long time. I'm running Drekthars instead of that old Merc guy. It has made the deck better. The deck is still not good enough because it still gets punished off the board by Pirate Warriors and Odd Hunters and stuff like Defile. Let's talk about Big Shaman. So Big Shaman's a deck that's actually super sweet. The inclusion of stuff like Wildpower Caverns and Buff Lightning Storms has made this deck really, really good. Obviously, Wind Chills and Overdrafts don't hurt. But yeah, I'm running the Runaway Blackwings because that was, when I last played it. Feel free to run Abominable Lieutenants. Could be a very solid inclusion in that place. And then the last deck in these in this tier 3 that I want to talk to you guys about is Elemental Shamans. This deck actually, it's running that same solid core that a lot of these Shaman decks are, right? Thwergle Talks, Ice Fishing, Dungeoneers, Snowfall Guardians, Macaws, Sleep Breakers, and Wind Chills. But we actually got a super sweet win con here with Corrupt the Waters, that Battlecry quest for Shaman. So basically what you're trying to do is you're trying to complete that quest and then utilize that quest reward in combination with cost reduction like Granite Forgeborn and Fireplume Harbinger to make all these elementals in your deck super cheap. And then utilizing that quest reward in combination with really cheap Blaze Colors and Gyre Worms and Calamoses, just kind of OTK your opponent out of nowhere because it's a lot of bird damage, right? Blaze Colors are 10, Calamoses are 12, then you play a cheap Grumble, reset those Battle Cries that cost 1 again, do it all over again. You can do some pretty gross stuff, some pretty sweet mana cheating. and some pretty insane swingy turns. And that's going to wrap it up for the deck dump video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope that you could find one out of these 58 decks to ladder with and have a little bit of fun as we move into month number 2 of Alterac Valley. And yeah, just a reminder that codes and all that stuff for all of these decks that I've talked about today can be found in my Discord. The link to that is down in the description and the pinned comment. But yeah, I hope you guys actually did enjoy this video. I hope you guys got something out of it, that it was useful. Let me know down in the comments below what you guys thought about the formatting and stuff like that, things that you thought I could do better for maybe the next time I do one of these. Maybe post mini set if things get shaken up enough. But yeah, I really do hope that you guys enjoyed, and make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe if you did, and I will see you guys next time. Later.